See, that's why you have a degree in computer or whatever. Okay, welcome everyone that's just turning in. I'll just run through this real quick because that's where my thing was, published October 2020. It's 8 chapters long, addressed to all people. Comes from this dialogue with this head Muslim guy from the Sunni group. That sounds like a law firm or something. And there we go. Okay, so those are the basics of Fratelli Tutti. Again, sorry that there was a problem with the broadcasting, but Dawn came to our rescue. So thank you, Dawn. All righty, so a summary then of Fratelli Tutti. One of the other things that I found was difficult. Oh wait, I'm not doing this right. Hold on, sorry. I'm sorry for my delay. I need to do it this way. Okay. Almost there. All right, so one of the things that I also found challenging about Fratelli Tutti is just the names of the chapter. So I came up with my own names just to make it easier, basic summary. So my more basic titles for Fratelli Tutti. Hopefully I didn't click too much. Yeah, sort of, except for like chapter 2 is called A Stranger on the Road. I said, let's just call it the Good Samaritan. Or what is the envisioning and engendering an open world. Instead, I changed it to love, personal, and communal. Migration, I changed a heart open to the whole world. I changed to migration. So this is an easier way to find, okay, what if I want to zoom in and kind of where is he really talking about these issues? Here are the chapters. Now there's a lot of overflow. So this is a broad kind of, that doesn't just talk about migration in chapter 4 or just talk about the Good Samaritan in chapter 2, but basically these are the chapters that you go to for these main topics. So what are some themes and notables of Fratelli Tutti? What are some phrases that we hear? There are several Pope Francis phrases that we hear that he kind of comes back to over and over again. He talks about the throwaway culture. That's a piece that he talks about often. He talks about this culture of encounter. That's a major thing for Pope Francis, that we encounter one another, that we have this exchange of peoples. Solidarity, he's really big on solidarity. That's a word that he brings up quite a bit, that we are one community and we must be united, and we're all part of this one human family. He talks about the need for a regulated economy, not just letting things go on their own, but there's a need to regulate in some way. This idea, and this is a little bit controversial, especially if it's understood in the not correct way, is this common destination of created goods, the universal destination of created goods. That's another way he says it. The idea is that the goods are here for everyone. And we'll get into that more, what that means. But God created this world not for just the powerful to hold on to those things, but for everyone to have a share in the world that God created for all of his family. So again, it's based in creation, that God created the world, and here we are, not just for the few. And then some notable things that happen at the end. He goes into war and the death penalty at the end. I'll move this camera now since less important that it's there. Look on my shiny head. So those are some notable pieces that come out through Fratelli Tutti. So now I'm going to just kind of go through and talk about some themes that I picked out. Again, I can't talk about everything. So if you have read the document, maybe you've also got some contributions as well. But here are kind of the summary pieces. Again, this is a broad overview of what happens in this document. So chapter 1, he kind of lays out this dark world of all the problems that are in the world. And he ends with the idea of hope. It's like, don't close this book yet. Yeah, in paragraph 54, he says, despite these dark clouds, which may not be ignored, I'd like to offer the following pages to take home and discuss many new paths of hope. So he says there are some problems in the world, and we want to address these problems. So these are some of the problems. I don't think I named all of them that are in chapter 1, but I pulled a lot of them out. So that we are global, and yet we are very divided, maybe more than ever. We have lots of extremism going on, extreme, if we put in broad categories, extreme leftism, extreme rightism, extreme religiosity that sometimes results in violence, all these going to the way extremes. Again, this phrase of the throwaway culture he talks about quite a bit, that not only with goods, but also with people, and that people are expendable, and that they become kind of the casualties of economies sometimes, and big governments don't take into account the human person. It's just, they're just another number on the spreadsheet. And okay, if we lose 50 people, that's okay. So it's not just, we have lots of plastic in the world, but it's also people that are not being respected. He talks about the pandemic. That was probably a later addition to what he was talking about. Lack of universal human rights, although that we teach about these human rights, they are not universally applied and used. And then he really goes in and he kind of attacks the digital age that we live in. And hello there on Facebook, and welcome YouTube, watching digitally. He says that there's beauty to it, of course, because it connects us. But if you've ever been on Facebook or YouTube or Twitter or any of these things, there is a lot of nastiness that goes on. And he's addressing those as well. Those, which I think is very interesting in, I think it's paragraph 42 and following. And that we are, he really talks about the digital media and everything that then gives reign to a bunch of ideologies that are crazy, and there's all kinds of conspiracy theories that go on. And so here are some problems. And then this destruction that we are not worth things, this destruction of self-esteem. So chapter 1 kind of lays out, here's what I see as the major problems in our world right now, and here's what I'm trying to address, or these things that really threaten, particularly there's other problems in the world, of course, but threaten our social friendship. What are the barriers? What are the obstacles that we need to overcome in our current age? Chapter 2, the Good Samaritan. As I say here, if you only read one chapter of Fratelli Tutti, this is the chapter to read. It's a beautiful meditation upon the parable of the Good Samaritan. And I think this could be, you kind of can tear this part out, and this is your meditative piece. And I will just meditate upon the Good Samaritan kind of for my prayer for a week or a month or a year or whatever. This can be my focal point. So I think of all the parts of Fratelli Tutti, this is the greatest hit of the document, I would say. Sometimes when a band releases an album or something, the album may or may not be great, but there's one like stand out, like that song is just awesome, and I want to go back to that song over and over again. I think it's a great album, but this is the standout, I would say, the greatest hit of the document. Now, he talks about the Good Samaritan. He kind of weaves that in. That's kind of the theme for the entire document, but it really is focused in on chapter 2 that he talks about that piece. Okay, and then chapter 3, which I have called love as personal and communal. So if the basic principle is of love is that if we use Aquinas's definition, which he talks about a lot about Aquinas as well, that it's willing the good of the other. It gets you out of yourself. It's loving another, sacrificing for the other. He says it starts off personally, but then you keep on widening the sphere. And what does love mean? And how far does it go? And do we love our neighbor as ourselves? Right? Again, coming back to the Good Samaritan. Who is my neighbor? Well, your neighbor is everyone. That circle keeps on getting broader and broader. So if we say that we are a community of love, then naturally, as it says, it impels us towards universal communion. Because that's what we're striving for heaven, right? Heaven is a community of all the, it's a great big love fest in the sky, right? It's everyone in love and sharing love with one another. There is no lack of love in heaven. And so here on earth, we want to prepare ourselves for that we love not just the neighbor right next to me, but the broader, but it keeps getting broader and broader. So that's one of the themes, is it gets bigger and bigger. He then attacks a little bit this radical individualism, which is one of the issues that is going on in our world today in paragraph 105. And I've picked out these kinds of things, these paragraphs and I've tried to underline the key phrase or words, because in that area then of those paragraphs, he's talking about these issues. So this is kind of the summary statement of that. I like how it says it is clever. Radical individualism is very clever. And sometimes people think that we don't need any kind of rules or regulations, just rely on our own selves, and we will take care of other people. And that doesn't necessarily work always that way. If it's just all about ourselves and I can figure it out, we need one another. So if we just think, just my own ambitions, that's, it just connects to so many things with our lives that we don't just think about what our own goals are, our own ambitions, or our own feelings, or whatever are about something that I'm going to decide for myself or whatever. Sometimes we have to be forced to do things that we don't necessarily want to do. That's why I sometimes say that's one of the reasons we have Sunday Mass as an obligation, right? Because if we say we love God, it's once a week at least that we can. Do you really? Will you get out of your bed and go to somewhere else that you will be with a bunch of people that you don't necessarily want to be with, and have all these other voices or whatever? And you could be much more comfortable at home. And we had to do that through the pandemic. But one of the things of Sunday Mass is it requires us to put into action what we say. Do we love God and our neighbor? Yes. Okay. Get to Mass. There's other ways, but that's just one example, of course. But because sometimes people say, and maybe more so before the pandemic, I can just worship God at home. And whereas that's true, and that's what we experienced over the past year, I think the pandemic has taught us also that it's much better to be in community for the most part. Although it's sometimes more comfortable because you can have your coffee or whatever, and you're sitting on your couch. But this gets us out of ourselves. That's the principle of love. It gets us out of ourselves. And then this is a great summary here of solidarity in chapter 115, or in paragraph 115. Did I mark that correct? Sorry, that's 116. I mismarked. So solidarity means much more than engaging in these sporadic acts of generosity. It means all of these things, that we look for those things. We look for those structural causes of poverty. We look for those structural causes of inequality and the lack of work and housing and land and all those kinds of things. So again, he's rooting it in love. It's not just, hey, let's go do social justice. It's, I love my neighbor and I love my neighbor as myself. The question is asked in the Good Samaritan, who is my neighbor? And then what does that mean? And then if I actually love, that means I don't just say it, but I put it into action. And so you just keep on expanding the circle, taking it to its natural end, which I really love. I love doing that. It's like, okay, if this principle is true, well, then what does that mean if we continue to broaden that idea? And that's what he's doing here. He's putting this all in the context of love, and love wanting the best for another person. It just naturally leads to all these other things. A little bit more on chapter 3. And this, he gets a little bit into migration here as well, but just the idea of borders, and those cannot be, we can't, if we love our neighbor and if things are created for everyone, then that we can't put up barriers and say, you cannot have ever any access to that. Now, he's not saying that we need to like, okay, open borders for everybody. That's not what he's saying. But he is saying that the place where you are born cannot define how much dignity you should be granted, or availability to healthcare or food or water. Just because you were born in this place doesn't mean that you shouldn't have food. And that sadly is the case in much of our world. And so Pope Francis is trying to address this, is if we love our neighbor, then we have to be looking out for those spots where people do not have basic dignity, basic access to a livelihood. And then he's not anti-private property. Sometimes people think, okay, he's like, oh, this crazy communist or whatever. Take away everything. It doesn't belong to me. Well, things don't belong to us. That's this Christian idea, right? We are stewards of the created goods that God has given us. So he's not saying we need to abolish private property or abolish borders or abolish these things, but that everything that is in the world we don't own, and it's really from God. God is the one who has everything. And so we are called to look for those opportunities to, where am I called to share with my neighbor, and not just to wall myself off and say, no, this is mine, you can't have it. Again, he's not opposed to having a house or private property or those things that you need to have to live and to have a good, healthy lifestyle. That's all well and good. But he does say, like, but then consider, what do you have, what do you still have? And that really belongs to others, so that others can also share in food and water and housing and all those things. So private property is not like an absolute, right? It's a secondary principle. It's important, but it's secondary principle, first of all, for the universal destination of goods, so that all our brothers and sisters can participate. All right, any questions about that? Yeah. Please.
I read that part about immigration. He was really strong, I thought, about taking care of immigrants.
Yep.
And he went through like all these Old Testament verses, and one was like, immigrants should be granted the same rights and almost like citizenship.
Right.
And I was thinking about, like, I mean, so many things. Like even here, undocumented immigrants can't get a driver's license, and kids can't get health insurance and stuff like that. It should be a basic right for a child that's living here.
Right. Yep. Very good. Yep. He goes into all that. The other thing that sparked me, I was going to also say, is that I take it as a compliment. Sometimes when people tell me, like after a homily, I felt like you were speaking right to me. And I'm like, well, great, I'm glad, because it's kind of the idea is I'm speaking to everyone, but if it feels like I'm speaking to you personally, great. But I'm not. I'm talking to everybody, and I don't exactly, as I'm going to say this, Marlene, I have you in mind. So I'm talking to you. So I hope you are listening to this. That's not ever the case. But sometimes people feel that way. And I think that we sometimes feel that way, maybe with Pope Francis's writings or the popes or whatever. And Pope Francis is not writing to the United States of America. We think sometimes that we are the center of the world or whatever, and that he's, attacking our immigration policies or anything. He doesn't really know what's going on. I mean, we are one country of however many countries there are in the world. And we sometimes think we're the center of the universe, and we're not. And so take it personally, but not too personally, the writings that he has. So don't think that he's on Trump's bandwagon, or he's on Biden's bandwagon or whatever. He's not. He's a much more global fellow, and he has much more in his mind, like Argentina, where he's from. That's his point of reference, and a lot of Italy, I suppose, too. But his main point of reference is Argentina. That's his experience. So to that point too, is don't think that he's like telling us, the United States, how we are doing things wrong. We should take it personally, but not too personally. So with migration issues, yes, and we're getting into the migration piece too, of immigrants, that yes, they need to be treated with human dignity, right? That we are all brothers and sisters. Thanks. That was a great addition there as well. Any other points or comments? Great. So into what I'm just calling migration, a heart open to the whole world. This was an interesting phrase too, the way, and it makes perfect sense. I just hadn't really heard it expressed this way before. But he says, ideally, unnecessary migration ought to be avoided. And then I was quoting that to Father Ashmore yesterday, and said, really, why? It's like, because you have built up their own countries, that they don't have a need to migrate to another country, because their own countries have sustainable access to food and water and healthcare, and many reasons why people migrate from one place to another. And again, we are not necessarily just talking about the United States. There's migration happening all around the world, but they move from one place to another because there are not jobs, or there is not food, or there is not basic health care, or whatever. That's why people move, because people are trying to take care of their family and things. So ideally, he says, unnecessary migration should be avoided, because in this global solidarity, we are building up everyone. He says, but in the reality of the world that we are living in, and the reality of sin is people are hoarding stuff, people have to migrate. But ideally, we are building everybody up. And so that's kind of a nice kind of way to think about, well, how do we work so that everyone is built up, not just us, right? But there is a reason why a lot of people come to the United States, because there's lots of access to all these things, right? And, so how are we sharing these more? And he really talks about, at the same time, he talks about the beauty that happens when people are moving around, and when there is a migration, that there is this mutual assistance that happens among peoples, and this interchange of ideas, and that we have a broader sense of who we are. So we have this mutual assistance that happens when people come from one place to another. He has this phrase, then also this, which is an interesting idea, this local narcissism, which I think is an interesting phrase, that people get caught into their own culture and get closed off, that this is the way it is. And they kind of worship their own culture, and anything that comes from outside to their culture then is seen as an attack or an enemy. And he's saying that's not a healthy expression of culture. That you should have a celebration of your culture, But part of the celebration of the culture is being able to be in interaction, in encountering with others, because that actually brings out more of your own culture. You see the beauty of your culture and you see the beauty of their culture. So he is warning against this kind of local narcissism that turns one in on one's own culture and not to see others. So it's important we have this globalization that is going on, and he says that we need to be local and universal, that it's both and. He is not advocating for let's have this kind of generic world culture. And we see that sadly just in our own country, that's kind of pronounced, right? You drive along I-70 or whatever, and you can see the same restaurants at every stop, or it's like, okay, well, there's a Subway. That means there's a, McDonald's right across the street, or you see someone builds a CVS builds one, and then Walgreens is going to build right across the corner, right? So it's all across at least our United States, and that's becoming more and more global, and it's kind of to the detriment, really, of the local flair, the local culture. Now, those things have a place, right? Because of the global nature of our things, I am probably more likely, that's true, to stop at a Subway if I'm on a road trip than to go explore whatever mom and pop restaurant or whatever, because I don't know what it's going to be. So there is an importance of having this kind of these universal principles, and maybe Subway is the best example, but universal principles that go throughout all of the world. But we can't lose the local flavor. So he's not advocating for like a universalism, but he's also not advocating for, on the other extreme, of course, is the idea that's really growing up in a lot of places, this kind of nationalistic mentality that we are closing off and locking off. A lot of elections or whatever have elected these kind of nationalistic leaders, and that's a problem. That whatever, we are the best, and our culture is the best in the world, or whatever. That's not good for a global society either. So it's not a bland universalism, but it's also not this toxic nationalism. A love for our culture, a love for our nation, an authentic nationalism is good, right? That's why I'm saying we should bring up the cultures. We should have a love for our homeland, right? But not so that it gets to a point that it's preventing this global solidarity. He also talks about the indigenous peoples and to cherish their roots and everything. But at the same time, he's saying we shouldn't be like locked into where we were in the past, and there should still be this encounter there. Okay. So those are the basic themes there from chapter 4 about migration. Anything else there? Yes.
Did the Pope use the term toxic nationalism?
No, I made that up.
I love it.
I don't think he said toxic nationalism, but
I was just curious if that was.
I don't think that's a Francisism. I think that's a Kentism. It would be something maybe Francis would say, but I don't think he did. Because then he talks about politics, and I had to read this part like 20 times. Like, what are you saying here? But so the idea of the word politics comes from people, right? So the politos, or whatever that is in the Latin, that it means that politics is the work of the people, right? Liturgy is like, what is it? Work of the people, for the people. It's both. It's work of the people and for the people. And politics is the work of the people and for the people. And so he talks a lot, and this maybe it's also just kind of a lost in translation thing that doesn't maybe translate as well in English, but he's talking about like populist movements or popular candidates in politics. And he's saying the idea, again, popular, that means you're of the people, theoretically, and not just about getting more votes. And so he's advocating for popular candidates, but not in the sense, but that means being honestly working for the people and with the people. That's what popular should mean. Popular. You ever see Wicked? I want to be popular. Okay. Get that. No one's seen Wicked. It was a very popular song and a very popular musical. Okay. So he talks about in 159 this idea that those popular leaders, puts that in quotes, are those capable of interpreting the feelings and the cultural dynamics. So they are able to understand those things. He talks then about employment in 162, and it's a very simple sentence. I don't think I put it up here, but if I did, you'll see in a second. The biggest issue is employment, period. The biggest issue is employment. Boop. The popular thing, since it promotes the good of the people, is to provide everyone an opportunity to nurture the seeds that God has planted in each of us. So employment is something that is good. He's not like anti-employment or anti-market or building things up. Very much for all those things. All those things should be developed. And the popular thing to do is to work for employment, because that helps people to live their dignity, because they can feed their families. They can live a dignified life. If there are no jobs, that then brings out more extremism and more separation, because people are desperate. And when people get desperate, desperate times come from desperate measures or whatever. So he talks here's where he talks about that. He also talks about the marketplace. Again, it's not a bad thing, but it has to be, we can't just depend on the marketplace just to do everything, right? There are some political ideologies, I believe, that say just let the market do its thing and it'll resolve all of our problems. We just need a good, healthy market and everything will be great, because then people will speak out of their generosity and they'll have extra money, and then they will give to these various charities or whatever. And he says the marketplace is not going to define it by itself. It needs to have some backing and basis, and maybe it's rooted in sin, right? Because if we are called to love, that's what we're supposed to do. But there is sin in the world, and we don't love one another. We see that at the very, very local level in families or in our own relationships. But then we are greedy and selfish sometimes, and we sometimes need a little extra encouragement to say, "Hey, live up to who you're called to be. Live up to don't settle for sin, right? Think higher. Think what God is calling you out of yourself. Think of love. Think about service." But we have a great tendency to laziness, to greed, to all those things. And sometimes we need to be encouraged to do the right thing. It's much easier to sit and binge Netflix all day long rather than to go out and do charitable work. It's much more comfortable, right? And so sometimes we need that encouragement. Hey, get off the couch. Let's go. And so the marketplace needs that too, just because it's run by people, right? And if there's no encouragement, it's just about the bottom line and not about these other things, well, it's going to get caught up in various aspects of sin. So I need some encouragement. We had our stewardship, talks and stuff this past month in October. And one of the principles of stewardship, it's not really because the church needs your money. It's that you need to give. We all need to give, right? That's the basic principle of stewardship. We are better when we give of ourselves. It's not give to the church because the church has programs that we need to have funded, and please give money so we can fund these programs so that we can be a healthy thing or whatever. That's not the principle of stewardship. The principle of stewardship is it's much more about you need to do this, and I need to encourage you to do that sometimes, not because I need it, but because you need it. So the same thing with the marketplace or whatever else is, we sometimes need that encouragement. Otherwise we go into sin and self-destruction and laziness and whatever. So then from chapter if you know anyone that's wanting to go into politics, I would recommend reading paragraphs 176 through 197. It really talks about what a good politician should do and should be. And it's really quite beautiful. I have never had an interest to go into politics. Well, no, I take that back. When I was a junior in high school, I ran for student council. And the reason I ran for student council, well, one, I was dating this girl who was also in student council, but two, but two is I wanted to make posters because I wanted to have fun with it, because I saw all those posters. I want to make posters. That's what I so I ran for student council because basically I wanted to make posters. And then I got elected as one of the student council reps, but for my senior year. I was never on student council before. But that was my only foray basically into politics. Was I made posters run for student council when I was a junior in high school for my senior year. But it's really quite lovely. I skipped past this, but he does talk about the need for the United Nations or some sort of international organization to help countries to be who they are called to be. So that is important. And there needs to be some restructuring and reevaluating of all the principles and tenets and things that are going on with the United Nations. So it's called to kind of revise and revisit some things. Again, that's talking on a level that's up here. That's like, okay, that's for y'all, because I'm not going to be involved in the United Nations, and I'm also not going to be a politician. But it's some beautiful stuff in there. And the last paragraph, 197, is, I think, just a great kind of summary. It says, politics is something more noble than posturing, marketing, and media spin. Those sow nothing but division, conflict, and oblique cynicism, incapable of mobilizing people to pursue a common goal. At times, in thinking of the future, we do well to ask ourselves, why am I doing this? What is my real aim? For as time goes on, reflecting on the past, the questions will not be, how many people endorsed me? How many people voted for me? How many had a positive image of me? So this is very real, practical stuff that I would encourage anyone that's wanting to go into politics or is in politics to reflect upon those things. Okay. It's chapter 5. Anything there? Chapter 6 talks about then communication. And this is, he kind of digs in more to the idea of what's going on in our world with, hello on Facebook and YouTube, what's going on in the media. And I think that phrase here really resonates very much with this noisy potpourri of facts and opinions. It's everywhere. I mean, I have a YouTube channel. Anyone can have a YouTube channel, and then it's just Joe Schmo or Jane Schmo or Father Schmo or whatever. Any Schmo you want can put up whatever he or she wants. And if they have slick marketing and everything, it can be very appealing and very interesting. I listen to the most interesting podcast. I don't remember who turned me on to the Daily from the New York Times, but there was a fascinating podcast. Have you ever listened to the Daily podcast?
No, but I think.
Okay. Well, it was super. And so it's possibly the best podcast I have ever heard, which is saying something, but it was, hold on, I'm gonna try to find it. It was, so if you want to look it up, and for those of you watching at home, it was, I gotta zoom back here. Zoom. Everybody loves to zoom. Oh yeah. So from September 10th, it's called "We Are Going to Take Over the World," and it was about there was a video that came out about the September 11th attacks, and it was this conspiracy theory video that was, kind of shoddily researched, but slickly produced. And they were printing out DVDs of this, and it gained this notoriety, and then, more and more. And it talked about how this instance could be seen as kind of the beginning of all these conspiracy theory videos that people find very intriguing, very appealing, and it's just put together. And people don't care if it's shoddily researched. It's if it's put together well and with the right dramatic music and everything, it's very compelling. And so, very interesting podcast. And I also appreciated, to the New York Times credit, they interviewed the person that they weren't making fun of it. It was a legitimate interview. So someone who does believe in these conspiracy theories, I think could actually listen to this podcast and say, yes, he's right on and everything. So it's a very good interview. I think it's not it's not an editorial so much. We're presenting this. This is one kind of thing. I like NPR, All Things Considered, that's a great title. And so let's just consider everything. So it was a very good podcast. So if you want to know how did all these conspiracy theories maybe come up from, that one from The Daily is the podcast, and from the New York Times, and it's called We're Going to Take Over the World. So very interesting. And then just because there's all these conspiracy theories about the pandemic, right? There was that thing floating around, Facebook pandemic or something like that. And it's kind of all this roots in these things. So, yeah. So anyone come up with a thing and they put on their own ideas and interests, and everyone else is wrong if you don't believe in us. So, and he comes, pretty strong. It's not, the solution is not relativism, that, you have your truth, you have your truth, you have your truth. That's not what it is. There is a universal truth, and that's what we're looking for together. And we don't always agree on what the universal truth is, but there is truth. And he talks in paragraph 207, murder is not wrong simply because it's socially unacceptable and punished by law, but there's a deeper conviction. It's true. Murder is wrong. And it relates to a universal truth. So it's not like you speak to your truth, and that's all the rage today, right? It's who can tell you, I don't ever want to tell you you're wrong or whatever, or because sometimes we are wrong and that needs to be corrected. But it's not attacking people. It's having this dialogue and conversation, communication. And so, and it comes into this piece of encounter, this culture of encounter, that we need to have real conversations. And I have found that really conversations in real life, debates on social media they're generally not very fruitful, right? But having real conversations with a real person, and you can even do this on the phone, I suppose, or through a FaceTime, but even better if you can be in person with another person, having real contact, real eye contact, seeing the various body language that's happening. It's much more effective. There have been several times that I've talked with some marriage prep couples about some, challenging things about what the church teaches, either about abortion or about gay marriage or contraception or whatever. Those are things I'm not going to get into a conversation on Facebook about. But when I have a conversation and a dialogue and an encounter, they were much better conversations. And so that's why he's just saying we need to have more conversations, not just do media blasts. That's not really helpful. We need one-on-one or small groups, and those are the kinds of things that we need. And this, I wanted to include all of this piece, but I didn't include that paragraph number, but kindness is the last one from 224. That's a great paragraph. I think I quoted Jewel, was it last Christmas, a couple Christmases ago? Only kindness matters. But it's important. We often don't find time to say, pardon me, and thank you. And then I ran out of room on the page, but then it goes on to say, yet now, every now and then, miraculously, a kind person appears and is willing to set everything else aside in order to show interest, to give the gift of a smile, to speak a word of encouragement, to listen amid general indifference. If we make a daily effort to do exactly this, we can create a healthy social atmosphere in which misunderstandings can be overcome and conflict forestalled. So it's beautiful. Paragraph 224, that's an all-star paragraph in my mind of the importance of basic kindness. So we just do that. So communication and then conflict, because sometimes when we have communication, when we have these encounters, we do have conflict. And what do we do with those kinds of things? So there's the local conflict, and then there is the wider conflict. So he's talking about interpersonal conflict, but also conflict that happens within nations or whatever. And so when people are planning things or coming up with economic treaties or whatever, we cannot lose sight of the human person, right? And it's here where I think he talks about, let's see here. What's that? Public demonstrations? Yes.
Well, what he says is violent public demonstrations on one side or the other.
Right. He does. You're quoting him exactly right. I thought I put that up there, but I did not.
Yeah, you did. I'm reading it right off the screen.
Oh, okay. It's like, wow, you read them. The ... Yes. It's like, I thought I put that up. So yes, I should have put that elsewhere. I know I had that. Very good. Karen, you're brilliant.
Be along with it. I'm trying to get into heaven, would you please?
So yes, the violent demonstrations on one side or the other are don't really do anything, right? Demonstrations can, but violent demonstrations. I mean, should we maybe go out and protest things? Sure, but when they turn violent, I mean, we're not accomplishing anything. So, and then to have reconciliation, we need to have conflict sometimes. We can't, if we're really truly going to have reconciliation, it does come out through conflict. And then he also talks about this idea of remembering the past and memory. That's what there's a piece starting on paragraph 246 about remembering the past, and there are the wrongs that have been done to us. We can never move forward without remembering the past. So the injustices that have been done, there is some tendency to kind of forget some terrible things that have happened or in the past, right? And we don't remember them, we repeat them, right? So we have to remember these things. But it doesn't necessarily mean that, like, and forgiveness, he talks about the oppressor, and forgiveness does not mean you just allow the oppressor to keep on oppressing you. You can forgive them, but you also can't allow them to continue on with the violent or oppressive behavior. So it doesn't necessarily mean that we forgive and forget. We say that often, but we forgive you, and not that we're going to hold that on, but we also can't forget, because that informs behavior that we do now, right? So if someone's been abused or hurt or whatever, it's a challenge to get, first of all, to that forgiveness piece, but it doesn't mean that you say, okay, now we'll go out and hang out some more. No, we can't forget those things too, because we can't enable bad behavior, right?
One of the things
Yes,
that,
please.
when I talk about that forgiveness with my clients, it also means remembering not only what we're talking about forgetting past, but putting back together.
Oh,
in
yeah.
a new way,
Good.
Remembering.
Good. Yeah. We put back together in a new way. Very good. And then in this chapter is somewhat one of the pieces that's a big takeaway for the document is about war and the death penalty. I like the way he says war is a failure of politics and of humanity, shameful capitulation, stinging defeat. So it's a good way to think about war. It's not noble. It's a failure. Sometimes it's necessary, but it's a failure when that happens. So, I mean, war should be avoided at all costs. but again, in the context of not allowing oppressors to continue on, right? So he says something about like every war has been considered to be a just war or whatever, or they've made an argument for every war to be a just war, and he said that can't possibly be the case.
Isn't that
Oh yeah, there it is. What's that again?
isn't that the stance of the US bishops?
What's that?
Just war?
Sure, but what he says is war can easily be chosen by invoking all sorts of allegedly humanitarian, defensive, and precautionary measures, and even resorting to the manipulation of information. In recent decades, every single war has been ostensibly justified, and then by both sides, right? So that something is wrong there, right? So that's kind of the idea: is there can be such a thing as just war, the just war theory. It's in quotes. But war is only justified as a defense against oppression, right? That it's the principle of self-defense on a global scale. So like if someone attacks my house or whatever and comes to attack me, that doesn't mean I just stand there and say, okay, I'll take it, beat me up. No, that's not what it says. It says I should be able to stop that person. And it does not give me the legitimacy to, okay, I'll pull out my gun and shoot this person and kill this person if there's any other method to stop that person, So I might need to take out a gun and stop that person, shoot that person in the leg or whatever, to stop that person from attacking me. Still, it's bad to harm. It's still bad to hurt somebody, but that might be what I need to do. So war is justifiable, if you will, in the case of self-defense on a global scale. But if both sides are saying we're doing this out of self-defense, something's wrong there. That's the point I think he's making. Everyone wants to justify everything. Oh, well, I was justified in doing this. I was justified, and you just because we do that personally, and he's saying nations do that also. And it's I don't think that necessarily those things are necessarily justifiable.
On that whole thing, challenging the just war theory.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's in quotes, right? And he's really speaking more strongly that we should never ever go to war again. There's really no excuse for it. We are really doing bad in our human project if we go to war. That's the basic thing. So he's not advocating war at all. He's saying war no more. We are done with wars. That was a stupid thing that we ever did. We should not ever do that again. So no more war. That's what he's calling for. And he says no more death penalty as well. He said there. Well, again, that's.
Well, I mean, it's easy to say no more wars. Let's all just talk about it until somebody gets you over the head, and then you say, no, this isn't going to work.
Well, sure, and that's why you have the just war theory. Is if it gets to that point, then yes, but that's something major has broken down, and he's trying to. That's the whole point of this thing. He's trying to avoid that because we need to be working together.
But does he give any idea for us to work with evil, with those evil forces, other than war?
Yes, this whole document is all about that.
Well, good luck with that. No.
Well.
I become very frustrated with simplistic answers to difficult questions.
Well, this is not a simplistic answer, but I like the subtitle, Fratelli Tutti. Good luck with that. I do, and no, I do, and it's not. I mean, Bishop Barron did another video about this, and he says that Pope Francis speaks often in a prophetic voice, right? So the prophetic voice is a calling for us. No more war, no more war. We will not do any more war. Okay, that's the principle, that's the call. But what happens if things break down? Well, then we might have to, yes. But this whole document is written really kind of with, I think he has a sense on the global scale, things are getting ugly.
Yeah.
there's extremism, there's the people yelling at each other on the media, there is the breakdown of society. All these things are fashioning us up for a major worldwide conflict, right? And he's trying to take the air out of that steam and bring us back down. And chill out, folks. Let's talk. Let's talk. Let's not take up our guns. I think that's kind of the whole sense of this document is he has this sense, and I think it's a fair sense that there is a lot of ugliness out there, and I need to address this. So
On the personal levels as well as on the national level.
absolutely, yeah.
Very unfortunate situation.
And he also says, as we've been saying in recent times, that there should be no, in a civilized society, there should be no reason for a death penalty. That's, and he kind of goes into,
Even the Bible says, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, and yet we don't do a life for a life anymore, regardless of how egregious the
Right.
become. I mean, our own catechism changed in the early 90s because we were for the capital punishment, and now we are not.
we were not for, we were asterisks about
We
capital.
were living with it as the only solution.
Right. And again, there comes a point in a society, and I think that what he's calling us to is that we have grown past that. And well, that's what he believes. And because there are systems that you can, I mean, we've got good security systems now where even a very egregious serial killer can be locked up, and we've got sufficient locks now to make that happen. And technology is there, that there's no reason just to kill somebody. Because then you allow for their conversion, right? So that's the idea. And some things, I mean, we just heard about that, right, too, with the thing in marriage in the gospel that can a man divorce his wife for any reason whatsoever? And Jesus says, you know, Moses gave you that law because you weren't ready for a fuller thing yet. But now there really shouldn't be a need for this, right? Because this is what we are called to. We are called to this higher calling. Yes, divorce still happens. That's a whole nother thing. But he's saying there's times where, you know, yes, we are given this because we need it. Or like, look at the pandemic, right? Everyone stay separate. Nobody come to mass. You know, that's not the final answer, right? It's like, don't come to church, don't get in groups. But we needed that at a time, but we want to grow past that. And so the idea is we have grown past the need for the death penalty. There was a time when we needed it. We couldn't contain people. We didn't have the technology. We didn't have good locking systems. That person keeps getting out. And so we need to just take care of that person. I was laughing because I'm gonna say this online to everyone, but hope nobody minds. But my poor parents sometimes had to deal with me, but also my brother. My brother had they could not keep him in his crib. He would just keep crawling out and getting out and could not stay in his bed. And I think they turned the bed upside down so that he could not escape. Because you have to, right? Because he could not be contained. So I think of, you know, criminals, sometimes they can't be contained. Well, if they just can't be contained, they're going out and killing other people. Well, okay, for the greater good, we have to kill this person because this person is doing this thing and we can't stop it. The idea is we can stop it now. There's no need. So that's the idea. Now there is, and I think the catechism also says there might be some remote areas. I mean, even in the 90s, whatever said, there might be some remote areas that can't do that. Okay, well, if that's the only means, then you might have to resort to that. But that was even the way in the 90s. It was as a very last resort.
And that makes sense.
Yeah. And then finally, this appeal for peace, justice, and fraternity, kind of how the thing ends is this commitment that this leader from the Muslim community and Pope Francis made together. We make this appeal in the name of innocent human life, in the name of God, in the name of orphans, all these kinds of things. I encourage you to read that. That's paragraph 285. I mean, I think you got it all up there, but it's really small and really long. But it's this kind of beautiful appeal that they kind of say, here's this commitment that we are making together. And the idea is, if the leader of the Catholic Church and the leader of the Muslim faith can come together and come up with and talk together and do some things together, can't like the rest of us? And doesn't that set a good example for us? That's kind of the idea is, we Catholics and Muslims don't need to hate each other. We can like come together and embrace and talk about things. Yes, we have disagreements and some serious disagreements. We have a different understanding of something as basic as salvation. We say Jesus Christ is the one unique savior of the world, and he's the way to get to heaven. The Muslims obviously do not say that, but yet we can still come together and talk and dialogue and have encounter. So here you've got this beautiful encounter of Pope Francis and the Imam. They're coming together. So he's really living by example, I think, and showing us the way for a more beautiful future. We don't have to kill each other. So, all right. And that's pretty much Fratelli Tutti. So hopefully that's been helpful summary. I went a little over, but I also started a little late because of the technological problems. So, all right. So I'll turn the light down. I think I've got 10:30 back. Does anybody have a couple minutes for a couple questions?
So fast. Like